America at the end of the 19th century stood on the edge of chaos. Gold prices collapsed. The market shook. Thousands of families woke up one morning with nothing left in their hands. The press screamed. The crowds were enraged. Congress was thrown into turmoil. And at the center of that fury, there was one man who did not say a single word. Jay Gould did not appear before the public. He did not apologize. He did not explain. He did not justify himself. While all of America called him the devil of Wall Street, the destroyer of the economy, the embodiment of bottomless greed, Jay Gould sat quietly in his private room, reading financial reports, correcting each figure, and calculating his next move. He did not celebrate, nor did he tremble in fear. To Jay Gould, society's hatred was merely background noise. What mattered to him was the rulebook, and he had played by the rules in the coldest way possible. People cursed his name in the streets, yet his fortune continued to grow. They called him an enemy of America, but the system America itself had created continued to protect him. Jay Gould understood a truth that very few dared to admit. In a world governed by money and power, morality often comes after victory. He did not need to be loved. He only needed to exist in a place no one could touch. And when the storm of public outrage passed, when the shouting gradually fell silent, Jay Gould was still there. Richer, more powerful, and more alone than ever. The question is not why America hated Jay Gould. It is why America created a man like him. Jay Gould was not born into wealth, nor did he grow up surrounded by powerful connections or doors already open to him. Gould's childhood began in a remote rural area of the eastern United States, where the land was barren, life was harsh, and the future was often decided before a child even understood what choice meant. His family was poor in a quiet, prolonged way, with no room for romance. His father took unstable jobs. His mother was accustomed to mending, saving every small coin. In that modest home, Jay Gould learned an important lesson early: that life was not fair. And if you did not seize control yourself, you would be swept away. Gould was a quiet child, not because he was shy, but because he observed too much. While other children dreamed about the future, Jay Gould viewed the world as a problem to be solved. Who held power? Who depended on whom? Who made decisions? And who had to bear the consequences? The boy soon displayed unusual intelligence, not a loud or showy kind of intelligence, but a cold, precise form of intellect, untouched by emotion. Jay Gould read books while others were already asleep. He studied mathematics, geography, and basic law, not to show off knowledge, but to understand how the world worked. Every number, every line of text to Gould was a tool. Yet alongside that intellect was a constant undercurrent of anxiety. The fear of poverty. The fear of being controlled. The fear of having to live dependent on the goodwill of others. Those fears did not weaken Gould. They hardened him. In the eyes of his peers, Jay Gould could seem distant. In the eyes of teachers, he was an outstanding student lacking warmth. And within his own inner world, Gould was quietly forming a vow that he would never allow anyone else to decide his fate. Gould's youth held no romantic stories, no beautiful dreams, only a single goal: to control life through intellect. He entered the adult world very early, not through strength, not through connections, but through the ability to read rules, exploit loopholes, and stay one step ahead of others. It was during those years of hardship that a particular character was forged, a man who did not believe in luck, did not believe in kindness, believed only in calculation. Jay Gould did not grow up to become a hero. He grew up to survive. And in an America entering the era of wild capitalism, that coldness was not a flaw. It was a lethal advantage. The later chapters of Jay Gould's life would enrage the entire nation. But to understand why he became one of the most hated men in America, one must return to this beginning, to the place where a poor boy learned how to control the world before the world had the chance to control him. When Jay Gould stepped out of a poor childhood, he did not carry dreams of riches with him. He carried an obsession. The obsession that if he did not understand the rules of the game, he would remain forever on the outside. The early years of Gould's adulthood passed in silence. He did not appear in the newspapers. He did not draw attention. He did not seek recognition. Jay Gould chose a path few noticed, but one that was extremely dangerous: law and finance. In an America expanding its territory, where laws were still young and many loopholes had yet to be closed, Gould recognized a crucial truth. Power did not lie in physical strength. It lay in paperwork, in contracts, in the fine print most people ignored. He learned to read the law the way one reads a battlefield map. Every clause was a boundary. Every exception was a hidden passage. Jay Gould worked relentlessly, but not in the usual way. He observed how others failed. He studied legal disputes. He watched entrepreneurs get swallowed whole simply because they did not understand what they had signed. In small offices and local courtrooms, Gould quietly accumulated the most valuable asset of all: knowledge of how the system actually worked. He did not rush to get rich. He patiently learned how not to lose. Jay Gould's earliest deals were small and attracted little attention, but they were carefully designed. There was always an exit, always a contingency plan. People began to notice something strange. Jay Gould rarely won big, but he almost never lost. While many charged into the marketplace driven by emotion and ambition, Gould kept a cold distance. He did not trust partners. He did not trust promises. He did not trust the natural fairness of the market. Every relationship to Gould was a calculation. Who needed whom more? Who held decision-making power? And who would bear the loss when everything collapsed? It was during this period that Jay Gould's quiet reputation began to form. Not as a likable man, but as a dangerous one. He spoke little, but when he did, it was often to finalize matters. He did not argue at length. He let contracts speak for him. Some people felt uneasy working with Jay Gould. They found no emotion in him, no warmth, only a gaze that always calculated several steps ahead. But others feared him, because they understood that Jay Gould did not play by feelings. He played by the rules, in the coldest way possible. To Gould, the law was not a moral boundary. It was a tool. And a tool is only effective when the user understands every detail of it. These years did not bring Jay Gould immediate wealth, but they gave him something far more important: control. He began to believe that he could shape outcomes, not through luck, but through preparation. And when Jay Gould took his first steps into the larger world of finance, he was no longer the frightened poor boy he once was. He had become a man who understood that in an America being built on money and law, whoever controls both controls the fate of many others. When Jay Gould set foot on Wall Street, it was not yet the glamorous symbol it would become in the following century. Wall Street in the 19th century was a cramped, noisy, suffocating space, where the smell of ink, sweat, and fear blended together. It was not a place for dreamers. It was a battlefield. Here, money never slept. Honor did not last long, and trust could vanish in a single afternoon. Jay Gould entered Wall Street not as a conqueror. He entered as a silent apprentice, observing, listening, memorizing every gesture, every glance, every moment of silence before the market shifted direction. Gould quickly realized one thing. Wall Street was not driven by numbers. It was driven by human emotion, by the fear of losing everything, by the greed to get rich quickly, by panic that spread faster than any newspaper. In the crowded trading rooms, Gould saw that crowds always behaved in the same way. They grew euphoric when prices rose. They panicked when prices fell. And they rarely stopped to understand why. Jay Gould did not fight this. He learned how to use it. He began with railroad stocks, the lifeblood of industrializing America. Railroads did not just move goods. They moved hope and fear. Every new line that opened carried promises of prosperity, and every rumor of bankruptcy had the power to destroy an entire community. Gould understood that whoever controlled information about railroads controlled the market. There was no need to own everything, only to own it at the right moment. He bought when others were afraid. He sold when the crowd became blinded by profit. And more importantly, he knew how to create those emotions. Jay Gould was not a man who shouted on the trading floor. He had no need for spectacle. His power lay in quiet conversations, letters sent at precisely the right time, rumors planted like seeds in the minds of others. People began to whisper about him, not because he was the richest, but because he was the most unpredictable. There were days when Gould appeared calm in the midst of chaos. Those around him panicked and sold off everything. He stood still, observed, waited. And when the market hit bottom, when fear reached its peak, Jay Gould acted. Silently, precisely, without hesitation. But Wall Street also left its mark on him. His coldness grew more pronounced. The distance between Gould and the rest of the world widened. He began to believe that morality was a luxury, that in a system built on greed, the survivor was not the good man, but the one who understood the game best. Jay Gould did not see himself as evil. He saw himself as realistic, and that reality was sometimes ruthless. During long nights in New York, amid dim lights and the sound of horse-drawn carriages on stone streets, Gould did not think about the people he had outmaneuvered. He thought about the next move. Always the next move. Wall Street taught him an essential lesson. To manipulate the market, one must first understand people. Understand their fears. Understand their limits. And understand that when crowds believe they are choosing freely, that is often when they are most easily led. By the end of this period, Jay Gould was no longer just an investor. He had become an invisible force, a man who could make stock prices tremble merely by his presence. And America, without yet realizing it, was witnessing the formation of one of the most dangerous manipulating minds in financial history. Railroads were not just steel and timber. In 19th century America, railroads were destiny. They determined which towns survived, which cities were left behind, who became millionaires, and who disappeared into silence. And Jay Gould understood this far earlier than most. As Gould moved deeper into the railroad world, he did not see trains. He saw power. Power to steer the economy, manipulate politics, and force society itself to follow tracks already laid down. The real battle began with the Erie Railroad, a line that seemed ordinary at first glance, yet served as a strategic gateway linking New York to the rising Midwest. Whoever controlled Erie controlled the flow of commerce across an entire vast region. Gould did not enter this fight alone. He allied himself with some of Wall Street's most notorious figures, men who also understood that the law of the time was riddled with loopholes, and that morality was little more than decoration for the newspapers. The Erie War was not fought with guns. It was fought in closed boardrooms, in hastily written contracts, in decisions made in the middle of the night. Gould and his allies legally issued additional shares in their own interpretation of the law. They diluted value. They created chaos. They forced their opponents into positions they could not escape. All of Wall Street trembled. The press called it a humiliation of the law. The public called it a betrayal of trust. But Jay Gould remained silent. While America raged, he calculated calmly. He understood that the fury of the crowd was usually short-lived, but control could last for decades. There were nights when Gould barely slept, not out of fear, but because he knew a single small mistake could bring the entire young empire crashing down. Pressure weighed heavily on a man already inclined to isolation. Relationships around Gould grew fragile. Trust no longer existed, only temporary interest. As his rivals shouted across newspaper headlines, Gould chose to disappear. He withdrew, observed, waited for the right moment. And then, to the astonishment of all Wall Street, Jay Gould prevailed. The Erie Railroad fell into his hands, not as a symbol of glory, but as proof that in the era of wild capitalism, the one who understood the rules of the game most deeply would be the one to survive. From that moment on, the name Jay Gould was no longer taken lightly. It became a force that other tycoons treated with caution, a man whose mere presence was enough to stir the market. But that victory also left scars. In Gould's mind, the world increasingly appeared as a vast chessboard, where people were pieces, and emotions were expendable. America began to ask a question. Were men like Jay Gould building the nation, or quietly bending it to their own will? As for Gould, he offered no answer. He kept moving forward, because in his view, power was not something to justify. It was simply something to seize before someone else did. The railroad wars lifted Jay Gould to a new level, but they also pulled him farther away from the world of ordinary people. And from here on, every step he took would not only shake the markets, it would shake the faith of the entire nation. The morning of September 24th, 1869, began like any other day on Wall Street. The New York sky gave no warning of disaster. Crowded streets, the sound of leather shoes striking stone, morning newspapers that had not yet begun to tell the story that would make all of America tremble just a few hours later. Inside a discreet room, far from the public eye, Jay Gould sat in silence. Before him was not gold, but numbers, relationships, assumptions calculated with chilling precision. Gould did not act in excitement. He acted with terrifying patience. After the Civil War, gold had become a symbol of stability. It was what farmers trusted, what merchants relied upon, what an entire nation exhausted by war, placed its hopes on to remain standing, and Gould saw an opportunity there, not to own gold, but to control faith in gold. He and his allies quietly accumulated it, a little more each day, slowly and deliberately driving prices upward, convincing the market that gold was becoming scarce. But the most critical piece was not on the trading floor. It lay within the government itself. Gould understood that if the federal government released its gold reserves, the entire scheme would collapse. So he sought access to those who could influence that decision, not through threats, but through persuasion, family connections, and vague promises heavy with implication. For weeks, the government remained silent, and that silence convinced Gould that he had won. Gold prices surged. With every passing hour, they climbed higher. Small investors rushed in out of desperation. Farmers panicked. Prices of wheat, corn, and cotton were strangled by a metal they had never even touched. Meanwhile, Jay Gould remained quiet. He did not celebrate. He did not appear. He sat and watched as America was stretched tight like a rope about to snap. Then came Friday, Black Friday. That morning, Wall Street boiled like a cauldron. Shouts echoed from the trading floor. Gold prices skyrocketed. Everything spun beyond control. And at that precise moment, the government acted. An order to sell gold was issued. Within minutes, the market reversed. Gold prices plunged straight downward. Those who bought at the peak were wiped out. Families were shattered. Businesses collapsed. Trust disintegrated. Wall Street sank into chaos. People screamed, wept. Some collapsed right on the trading floor. And Jay Gould, what of him? He had already withdrawn. In the final hours before the disaster erupted, Gould quietly sold off his holdings. Not all of them, but enough to preserve his position. As America stood in shock, searching for someone to blame, Gould vanished once more. No apology, no explanation. The press called him a traitor to the nation. The public cursed his name. Politicians demanded investigations. But no verdict was ever delivered. Jay Gould had broken no law. He had merely exploited it to its absolute limit. Black Friday did more than shake the gold market. It exposed a painful truth. That in the new America, a single individual could bring an entire nation to its knees through decisions made in the shadows. After that day, Gould became wealthier, but also more alone. Hatred toward him spread across the country. And it was from that moment that Jay Gould understood one thing. The greatest power does not lie in being loved. It lies in being impossible to stop. Black Friday etched Jay Gould's name into history, not as a hero, not as a convicted criminal, but as the coldest symbol of greed, intellect, and the emptiness that follows victory. And from here on, there would be no turning back for him. After Black Friday, America no longer saw Jay Gould as a businessman. People called him by other names. A manipulator. The Spider of Wall Street, a symbol of bottomless greed. His name appeared in the newspapers every day, not in the business columns, but on the front pages amid accusations, political cartoons, and collective outrage. Newspapers depicted Gould as a gaunt creature with sharp eyes, hands gripping invisible strings, puppeteering the entire nation. The crowd read and believed, because they needed a face to hate. And Gould, with his familiar silence, became the perfect choice. He did not step before the public to defend himself. He did not write letters of apology. He did not explain his motives. That silence did not soothe the anger. It allowed the hatred to spread even further. In taverns, people cursed his name. On trains, passengers whispered about how Gould had strangled agricultural prices. In bankrupt farming households, the name Jay Gould became a symbol of untouchable injustice. But what enraged the public most was not the financial damage. It was the fact that he was never punished. No grand trial, no prison sentence, no repentance. The law could not reach him. And that exposed a deep fracture in the American dream. That the rules of the game were written, but not for everyone. Jay Gould understood this better than anyone. In the years that followed, he continued to expand his power, without spectacle, without boasting. He bought shares, manipulated boards of directors, pulled strings from behind the scenes. Every move was legal, but every move deepened fear. Politicians publicly condemned him before their voters, yet behind closed doors, they still came to him. Because Gould did not need to be loved. He needed to be needed. As for him, his isolation grew increasingly evident. Jay Gould did not host lavish parties like Vanderbilt. He did not build castles like Hearst. He lived discreetly, almost invisibly. Friends grew fewer. Trust became rarer still. He understood that in the world he had created, no one stayed close out of affection. They stayed for advantage, and Gould accepted that. There were nights when New York City fell into silence, and Gould sat alone in his study. Before him lay reports and cold numbers. Outside, all of America hated him. But inside that room, there was no cheering and no satisfaction. Only a man who understood that he had won in a way that left no one willing to stand beside him. Jay Gould became a mirror reflecting the dark side of American capitalism, not because he was the only one who did such things, but because he did them better, more quietly, and without apology. From that moment on, he was no longer just an individual. He became a symbol of a question America was not yet ready to answer. If the law allows it, then where does morality reside? And Jay Gould, amid the hatred of an entire nation, continued forward, slowly, silently, and without turning back. When America called Jay Gould a monster of Wall Street, few truly knew how he lived behind closed doors. For unlike the image of a powerful manipulator, Gould's private life passed in almost absolute silence. He did not seek the spotlight. He did not appear at social gatherings. He did not enjoy being mentioned as a public figure. Jay Gould returned home like an ordinary man, reserved, discreet, always maintaining distance. His family lived in a quiet space, separated from the storm of public outrage outside. His wife did not appear in the press. His children were raised with discipline, kept away from the showmanship of New York's elite. Inside that house, Gould did not speak of Wall Street. He did not speak of manipulation. He did not speak of the millions gained and lost each day. That silence was not born of shame. It was the way he controlled his private world. Jay Gould believed that emotion was a weakness, and family, to him, was the one place that should not be drawn into battles for power. Yet that silence also created an invisible distance between Gould and those around him, between father and children, between husband and wife. He loved his family in the way of a man unaccustomed to expression. No sweet words, no grand gestures, only quiet presence and absolute control. Some dinners unfolded in silence, not tense, but not warm either. Outside, Jay Gould was a name that enraged an entire nation. Inside, he was a solitary man, unable to share the weight he carried within. He had no close friends, no confidence, no place to remove the cold mask he had worn since childhood. Even when faced with widespread hatred, Gould chose silence. No resistance, no justification. That silence led many to believe he was unfeeling. But in truth, it was the final layer of protection of a man long accustomed to living in a world where every word could become a weapon. Jay Gould understood better than anyone that once one enters the game of power, there is no room for weakness. And he carried that philosophy into his private life as well. During long nights, when his family had gone to sleep, Gould often remained in his study, not to plan new schemes of manipulation, but to think about what he had achieved and what he would never possess: respect, affection, understanding. Jay Gould accepted the exchange of all these things for control. But in the silence of family life, the cost became clearer than ever, because power can buy everything, except peace of mind. And in that quiet house, among loved ones who felt distant, Jay Gould continued to live, as he always had, silent, in control, and alone. The final years of Jay Gould's life did not end in spectacular collapse. There was no historic trial, no moment of public redemption. There was only a man growing old in the silence he himself had chosen. Gould remained wealthy. He still held complex financial networks in his grasp. He still controlled railroads, corporations, and flows of money on which America depended. But his health began to fail. His body could no longer keep pace with the mind that never stopped calculating. Pain came more frequently. Sleepless nights stretched on. Moments of stillness appeared, moments when even numbers no longer offered a sense of safety. Jay Gould did not complain. He did not confide. He continued to live as he always had, closed off, in control, distant. Beyond his walls, America was beginning to change. Debates over business ethics and the power of industrial tycoons grew louder. And Jay Gould, though still alive, had become a symbol of a past many wished to leave behind. The press no longer chased him as it once had, not because he was any less dangerous, but because his image had already been fixed. The perfect villain of an era. In those final years, Gould spent more time with his family. Yet the closeness still carried the weight of distance. He did not know how to be gentle. He did not know how to speak regret. There were things he never said, and never would. Jay Gould died quietly. No alarms. No crowds gathering to mark his passing. His death did not shake Wall Street. It did not bring the nation to a halt. A few brief newspaper notices, a few reminders of past manipulations, and then America moved on. There was no wave of mourning, no tributes celebrating his life. No one asked how he had felt. No one asked what he had given up. They remembered only the numbers, the crises, the families affected. Jay Gould departed as he had lived, without needing love, without seeking understanding. Yet in the silence of his death, one question lingered quietly. Did he regret it? Perhaps, in his final moments, Jay Gould looked back on his life as a long chess match. A match he did not lose, but did not truly win either. For he had controlled a vast portion of America, but he had never controlled how history would remember him. And when the door finally closed, Jay Gould left behind no grief, only a cold aftertaste of the price of power when it is built without human compassion. When Jay Gould was gone, America was forced to confront a question it had avoided for many years: who he truly was in their history, a cold, calculating manipulator, or an inevitable product of his era. Jay Gould's legacy does not live in speeches. It does not exist in statues or street names. It lives in how America looks back at itself. The railroads he controlled helped connect the nation in expansion. The financial systems he participated in accelerated growth at an unprecedented pace. But alongside that came inequality, suffering, and the erosion of trust. Jay Gould did not build the American dream in its idealized form. He exposed it. He exposed the darker side of a nation that believed success always belonged to the smartest and boldest. After Gould, America began to question the power of industrial magnates, to question whether the law was truly fair, to question morality in business. Reforms did not emerge because he felt remorse. They emerged because society realized it could not allow men like Gould to continue operating in limitless shadow. On a personal level, Jay Gould left behind an even more complex legacy. A man who mastered the market, but never mastered how to be loved. He left his children an immense fortune, but also a long shadow. A shadow of silence, of a reputation marked by condemnation. Today, when history looks back at Jay Gould, it no longer judges him through pure emotion alone. He is analyzed, dissected, and placed within the proper context of an America learning how to become a superpower. Jay Gould was not the only villain. He was simply the one willing to go farther than all the rest. And that fact forces America to look into the mirror. Because if a society allows such a man to exist and to win, their responsibility does not rest on the individual alone. Jay Gould's story did not end with his death. It continues to live on in modern debates about power, money, and ethics. Whenever a corporation grows too large, whenever the law fails to keep pace with the speed of money, the name Jay Gould resurfaces like a quiet reminder that success is never only an individual story, and history does not record only what people achieve. It also records the price society pays. Jay Gould has departed, but the question he left America still remains: whether a nation should measure greatness by power, or by the limits it dares to place upon itself.